President Trump has designated a transnational network called the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization. Biden didn't do it. Obama didn't do it. Trump didn't do it his first term, but he did it right now. And I'm so glad that he overcame resistance from the various neocons, other critics to do the right thing. This is the same organization that has stolen hundreds of millions of dollars that were designated for Palestinians who are now bereft, completely at a loss for resources. Actually, one thing that I found when researching this was that Hamas actually got angry because they thought that the Muslim Brotherhood was getting in on the grift.
Well, I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood, which was launched in the 1920s, ended up becoming an ally of Hamas, right? It was an ally of Hamas. So stealing the resources and humanitarian aid from the Palestinians in Gaza is pretty sick. That's definitely for sure. But what's interesting is the pushback from the neocons in regard to this designation.
And I think they would want it.
Well, I have some insight on that, which I'll get to in just a minute. But did you want to jump in?
I'll let you get your insight in because I have a good insight too. I'll come in after.
So I love putting these stories in historical context because a pattern that you'll notice with U.S. foreign policy, if you're paying close attention, is we tend to have this habit of funding, arming, supporting various, now considered terrorist groups or insurgencies and things like that, if it benefits the U.S. or our allies at a given moment, and then we turn on them, right? So I think the Muslim Brotherhood is a really good example of that. So I don't know if most Americans know this, but in the early aughts, the neocons, including, Dick Cheney, his daughter Liz Cheney, they were very much in cahoots with the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria in order to oust Bashar al-Assad. So I'm bringing up an article from November 26, 2006. This is the New York Times piece titled, U.S. Building Ties with Syrian Dissidents, Africa and Middle East, International Herald Tribune. Okay, so here are the important excerpts from this piece. So they wrote at the time that for more than a year, remember, this is from 2006. So for more than a year leading up to 2006, U.S. officials have snubbed high-level contact with the Syrian government under Bashar al-Assad, who's now been ousted, opting instead to explore ways to support the opposition. National Security Council staff members have met twice in the past 3 months at the White House with the National Salvation Front, a newly formed coalition of Syrian opposition figures in exile that includes the Muslim Brotherhood and a former vice president of Syria. Last fall, 4 U.S. officials, including a senior State Department advisor on Iran, David Dennehy, visited opposition figures in Damascus, including Haytham Maleh, who is a prominent human rights activist with close ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. So the fall of Assad ended up empowering the Muslim Brotherhood. And here's Colonel Douglas McGregor, national treasure, explaining more. Take a look.
Mr. Erdogan, he's the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, and that's particularly threatened to the Egyptians and threatening to the Jordanians. So they have felt Assad's fall very acutely. Assad was, despite whatever he's accused of, and he's constantly demonized, because that's what we do when we decide we don't like someone, he actually maintained minority rights, protected Christians, Druze, Shiites, Armenians, others, and he's now gone. And horrific things are happening behind the scenes, although Putin has intervened with his Chechen allies to try and moderate that and persuade the Jelani and his friends to behave differently. But then, as you see, the Israelis were anxious to benefit from the spoils of Syria, and they've moved into Syria, despite Mr. Erdogan's insistence that they get out.
So Israel very much wanted the fall of Bashar al-Assad. Assad was an ally of Iran's and wasn't willing to bow his head to the Israelis. So that's why what happened with the Syrian civil war, which began as an organic uprising, I want to be clear about that. It began as organic, but was then co-opted and it turned into a proxy war. And as a result, you know, Turkey has annexed portions of Syria following the fall of Bashar al-Assad, and Israel has annexed parts of Syria following the fall of Bashar al-Assad. And in the end, we got a former al-Qaeda terrorist, Ahmed al-Shara, as the new leader of Syria. This is the guy who was in the White House just recently. Remember, al-Qaeda is the terrorist group that our soldiers had been fighting in Iraq. They killed our soldiers, and the fact that we have an al-Qaeda terrorist visiting the White House.
It seems like terrorist month of the White House.
It's wild.
We just had this
so
dude,
wild.
We just had MBS. I mean, what's next?
How about we just
Osama
stop
bin Laden's family?
How about we stop arming terrorist groups in the Middle East? How about that?
How about we stop laundering their reputations and rehabilitating their careers for them?
I agree with you on that. Yeah. So we'll go to this Dave DeCamp video in just a second. But before we do, I do want to say that there is a connection between the Muslim Brotherhood and al-Qaeda. One of the Muslim Brotherhood's chief, theoreticians, Saeed Qutb, created the theological justification for Osama bin Laden in al-Qaeda. So, like, the designation of terrorist group, I'm for the most part fine with that, even though the Muslim Brotherhood is spread all across the globe and has different factions that vary in, their extremism. Some are more moderate, some are more extreme. Trump's executive order wants to kind of analyze the various Muslim Brotherhood groups and determine which are engaging in terrorism and which aren't. I like the fact that he wants to be specific in that designation. But at the heart of this issue, if you ask me, is this ongoing problem in U.S. foreign policy where we think it's totally fine to arm certain groups, and then when they're no longer convenient, essentially fight them. It's like perpetual war as a result of what we're doing.
I agree with that. I want to add another element, and that's Qatari funding. Just as I am opposed to countries like Israel and China and Russia pouring money into this country, trying to shape our public opinion, I oppose Qatar funding Muslim Brotherhood and other organizations. They actually fund our universities. Did you know that? And then our liberal universities are shaping the young minds of America, and a lot of it is anti-America. A lot of it is anti-founding fathers, for instance. Right now, Thomas Jefferson has basically been reduced to a slave owner, despite the fact that he was the author of the Declaration of Independence. So yeah, anyway, I want to get all of the Qatari funding out of our public discourse, just as I want to get the Israelis
all foreign funding,
all of it.
Period. It's very simple.
Exactly.
It's not that.
Yeah, you look at the bigger umbrella of the university problem, and you look at China. This has been a widespread issue within our university system and educational system ongoing. So I think it's not just Qatar. It's actually really looking at where is all of the foreign funding coming from and why. And to your point, it's now diluting our entire education system, reducing our Declaration of Independence founder, reducing our Constitution. And this is back to the point of ideological subversion and uprises this distaste. And, BLM is not on accident. All of these different, again, to your point on dividing the American public.
Yeah.
It is not on accident. This is all in an effort to divide us. And this starts in even K through 12 education now, where you have this huge indoctrination that happens. And it's, in my humble opinion, the transgender movement was absolutely ideological subversion of the youth. And 100%. This is what Charlie Kirk stood against and really turned the tables on. So it's looking at this, and I to your point on the Muslim Brotherhood, though, I think that it is important that he does nuance this.
Yeah.
Because there are factions that are not supporting Hamas, that are not violent. But he specifically zeroed in, I think, at northern Egypt and Muslim Brotherhood, and to not throw the whole baby out with the bathwater so you can still leverage international negotiation and deals and be able to build alliances where necessary, but do a targeted dismantling of those that are terrorist organizations.
That is precisely the approach that we should have taken to terrorists.
But hold on. Pause for a second, though. It's one thing to designate factions of the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, right? I don't want our soldiers going into any foreign country to dismantle anything at this point. I just don't.
And I think a lot of people agree with you.
Yeah.
On
Yeah,
that.
agree.
Especially a lot of us who had friends and family that went to Afghanistan right after 9/11. A lot of us lost people, knew people, came back different. But to that point, you look at the Muslim Brotherhood, and a lot of critics ran and said that this was going to be racist, X, Y, and Z. The Muslim Brotherhood, in some cases, you can say that it's a religious group, but it's really a political movement.
Yeah.
It's a societal movement. And that's the differentiation there. And you look at these countries in the Middle East. I mean, Egypt already designated them as a terrorist group.
Yes,
Many countries
so
in the
did
Middle
Jordan.
East did. You know who didn't, though, is the UK. And a lot of places over in Europe. And that's why you're seeing what you're
That's
seeing
so
in Paris,
interesting.
in Sweden,
Yeah.
for instance, in France, all kinds of places.
You mentioned the UK, and it's the same country that refused to do anything about the grooming gangs by the Palestinian.
Well, I mean, you'll
Wait,
get
hold on,
arrested in
hold
the
on,
UK.
wait, I'm sorry,
Pakistani.
Pakistani. Did I say Palestinian?
Yeah, you said Palestine.
Holy shit.
It's okay.
Pakistani men, because they didn't want to be offensive. That was their rationale. I mean, this
And
is
you get
suicidal
arrested in the
empathy.
UK if you speak up, if you
And
tweet
not
something.
only that,
It's crazy.
wait, I lived in Sheffield for a number of years, so
Okay.
I'm an Anglophile, but I think it's extremely unfortunate. They are arresting people for the things that you tweet.
Yeah.
No, that's crazy.
That is
knocking
so
on your
Orwellian.
door.
Insane.
And that's what was so concerning. You know, you see those viral videos and you think that could happen here. It is not that far away. That is across the pond. That could be happening here. And to be fair, I will say this as well. If Trump was not president, I think it would be happening.
Well,
I
you know,
agree with that.
kind of like when whatever happens in the UK, it'll happen in the United States eventually. If Brexit was a signifier for Trump, we should have seen it coming.
You know, it's interesting because the one thing that kind of protects the United States is the Constitution. We have a constitutional right to free speech, which is not afforded to the people of the UK. But, you know, what's really interesting is it's really up to the American people to protect that right. And it matters the most when you're willing to stick up for free speech rights for an individual who's saying things you disagree with, right? Because it shows that you actually do value the First Amendment. You're not just pretending like you care about the First Amendment to protect your speech or the speech of those you agree with, but when it comes to those you disagree with, you want to censor them, you want to silence them, you want to cancel them. You know, and I think right now there is like a growing movement of people who want to deplatform, cancel, just outright ban Nick Fuentes.
Yeah.
And you know what happened when he got banned from social media?
gonna get
He
stronger.
grew because you're not actually responding to the substance of what he's saying. You know, Tucker Carlson said this, and I totally agree with it. You can't kill an idea. All you can do if you don't like the idea is use more speech, dismantle the idea, show and prove that it's wrong. And rather than doing that, you know, there's just been this effort to silence or ban him. It's not going to work.
It's absolutely not going to work. And I want to point to something that I never in a million years would think that I would be quoting Nick Fuentes. Here I am. I just want to say I saw a video of him saying, "Stop trying to psychoanalyze my followers. It's not about that. They're not just upset about their economy. They're upset that their country is being taken hostage. And you're completely circumventing the issue. The people refuse to address it. They basically say, shut the hell up. We don't want to engage you on this issue."
But you have to engage, because if
have
you don't
to.
engage, then
You're going to lose an entire generation if you haven't already.
In the wake of Charlie's assassination, there was this, in my mind, chasm that of this huge void that was left for people to speak. And I'm not going to, I don't agree with Nick Fuentes on so many things. He is coming in and filling this vortex that kind of left as this ebbed out, this tidal wave of Charlie Kirk. And when people lose someone, especially to an assassination, they go towards extremism. And I think President Trump's response when he was asked whether or not Tucker Carlson should have interviewed Nick Fuentes was, "This is a free country. He has the right to do this." I'm quoting him. I'm not quoting him directly. I'm paraphrasing, but that is the essence of this. Yes, he should be able to have these conversations. Don Jr. said it too. I'm not in the business of canceling because I've been canceled.
Right.
Right.
And I think as the more we engage Nick Fuentes and this type of stuff, actually the better off it is, because you bring ideas, bad ideas,
Absolutely.
to light. You bring and that's
you actually
again,
respond to the substance.
Yes.
Respond to the substance of what he's saying. And
Yes.
look, I'm not saying this because I agree with, I support and agree with Nick Fuentes. But for those who are like constantly hyperventilating about him, the effort to essentially ban him from polite society has backfired significantly. How do you not learn any lessons from that? You have to actually engage in the conversations, engage in the substance of what he's saying or the argument that he's making, and do more than just engage in like these ad hominem attacks against him.
Yeah, and his critics like Mark Levin, whatever.
Yeah.
I don't even care about saying his name right, frankly. I'm just going to call him whatever I want to. And Randy Fine and Lindsey Graham, who's one of the biggest warmongers in the United States Senate, they're being exposed as people who are not America first, people who are not putting the American people first. So, you know, it's just boomerang back in their faces.
Well, President Trump gained momentum when he was canceled. And we saw
That's
this.
true,
When he was deplatformed, he became even more powerful because when you silence someone, you're not willing to engage in the idea. And if we continue on the Charlie Kirk, he went to campuses, he asked hard questions, he allowed debate. He said, when discourse stops, when dialogue stops, civil war begins. And so you cannot just decide to cancel somebody and not engage, because we have to acknowledge that then they gain even more power. And it's not a power that you want. And you don't want anyone to have too much.
And to that point, I will say last year I was at a Turning Point event in Detroit, and I was familiar with Nick Fuentes, didn't know a lot about him. They staged something. They're called the Groypers, as I'm sure you all know for the audience. They staged, I don't want to say a coup, but they staged an event outside of the Turning Point facility in Detroit. I would say, I'm not sure if you were there, Katie.
I was.
Over 150 young men, all young men that came from all over the country to Detroit to stage this kind of rebellion against Turning Point. And it was a very shocking but eye-opening moment of how many people, how many younger people actually resonate with him. And I think it's something that as the Republican Party, we should not ignore. We shouldn't take lightly. We need to listen to what he's saying, see where he's resonating with these younger kids, and take over where Charlie left off, right?
I think the problem is seeing where Nick Fuentes resonates with young conservative men would require the U.S. government to come to terms with the fact that their foreign policy
is completely hijacked
and is not desired by young Americans, right? That was always the case with people on the left, old and young, right? But now you have this, insurgent group of young conservative men who are looking at U.S. foreign policy and they're like, I don't like this. And Nick Fuentes is the only one who's like vociferously speaking out against it.
He's the only one. They're looking at, okay, let me describe what's going through the minds of young Americans right now. They're looking at our premiums about to go up 200% if Congress doesn't act by January 1st, basically. Prices right now, inflation is still humming along at a 3% rate, which is above the Federal Reserve target. The stock market is doing right, but the stock market isn't exactly the economy. I just got a stupid college degree and I can't pay my bills. The AI revolution is continuing apace, and I might not have a job in a couple months or a couple of years if I'm lucky. Those are the things that are going through their minds, and they're seeing billions of dollars getting siphoned and diverted overseas. And American men, especially, they're like, what the hell's happening? Why is our foreign policy being held hostage by a foreign state?
Why can't I afford a home?
Exactly.
Why isn't our government's attention? Yeah, all these issues are kind of compounding into what we're experiencing now. And so that needs to be addressed. Trying to silence anyone bringing these issues up, not going to work. And I think the proof is in the pudding. I mean, we've seen this happen again and again over the last several years.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lindy Lee. If you like this clip, please go to YouTube, look for Her Take, and subscribe. You won't regret it.